Representative Minor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we set out, I think, maybe right after the opening day of session, in an attempt to try and deal with about a $735 million deficit. And that included a number of subcommittee meetings and RBA reports and some of our own committee meetings and many, many days and hours of public hearing. And I know that you folks have tried to describe this as a revenue opportunity, that we're spending more money in an effort to get more money. But I think just in the brief period of time that we've talked about this budget, it's become increasingly clear that whether you want to talk about it as a fee or an assessment or a tax, somebody in the state of Connecticut, and in some cases only people in the state of Connecticut, are going to pay more if this bill becomes law than they do today. My understanding of this insurance fund is that it's an assessment on Connecticut insurance companies. So it isn't bad enough we've driven manufacturing out of the state of Connecticut. We're now going to penalize the insurance industry. That's a pretty neat prospect. So we're going to levy a fee out of an appropriations committee instead of dealing with a deficit through cuts. It's the arrogance that adds spending. $300 and change million, depending on how you count it. I think most people at home would deal with a deficit by adjusting their spending, Mr. Chairman, not by increasing a tax or a fee, not by moving things offline so they'll be harder to find in the future. You leave them right in front of you where you can balance their worth against some other program that we may or may not be able to afford this year or next year or the following year. I'll use school-based health clinics as an example. Instead of trying to determine a better way to do it, maybe cutting the expenses, what we did was we move them. We move them under the cover of another fund. One of our members here did a brief little report and found out that in the city of New Haven there are 18 community health-based centers and 12 school-based health clinics. We can't make any savings by combining some of the backroom efforts of those. Back office efforts can't accomplish any savings. So after months of a process, what have we done? We've put money back into a budget. We have added money to the bottom line of this budget. We are spending more than the governor spends. We are spending in some cases more than we were even projecting to spend before the deficit. It's amazing. The Department of Corrections. You know, I've heard the explanations. We're going to cut 390 jobs. Are they going to get cut on July 1st or are they going to get cut on June 30th? But we know enough about it to save $17 million. Is that a round number? Let me go to that page.
253.
That's judicial. I think it's a round number. I think it was $17 million. There's a lot in this book. I think if you started to pick away at it, which I'm sure I could do over the course of hours, well, it's 17.4 million. You're right, Mr. Chairman. It's not a round number. It's only round to the hundreds of thousands. We've backed into numbers again. Just so everybody in the state of Connecticut knows, these aren't based on fact. These are based on assumptions. They don't know whether they're going to turn somebody loose or they're not going to turn somebody loose. This committee doesn't know at the end of the process of voting on it whether we're going to increase spending that's not going to be recovered or decrease spending. After months of going through this process, it's just more assumptions. There were people in the office yesterday asking me to support putting more money into culture and tourism. And I told them I wasn't sure at the end of the day how they would fare. I didn't know whether they would get more money in this budget or get less money in this budget. But one thing I told them I was sure of is that you couldn't bank on this budget. This budget is meaningless. The agencies in the state of Connecticut, the nonprofits that aren't getting their checks, they all know what means something. What means something is you cannot trust the state of Connecticut. They're not going to give you a number that matters anymore. We shouldn't support this budget because it's not real. And more than that, it's not going to go anywhere. I think you know as well as I know this document will never see the light of day. It's not going to be taken up on the House and the Senate. It's never going to happen. But what's it going to do? It's going to provide somebody some cover. They're going to be able to say, we voted a budget out of the Appropriations Committee. I'm not going to go along with this sham. These numbers do not add up. They're not real. And at the end of the day, if you base your expenditures, if you're a nonprofit or a community provider, on what's reflected in this document, you'll be borrowing money you can't pay back. And that's the message I hope people take home.